today's tutorial. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make the gold sequin cake with some sugar roses and also the large rose on top of the cake. So I'm just going to run through what you're going to actually need for this tutorial. So for the actual sequined cake, we're going to need some white sequins. So just some plain white sequins. I got these from the cake decorating company in quite a large bag. You can get them in 1 kg bags or smaller bags if you don't need obviously a lot and you just want to cover one cake. You're going to need some piping gel. You're going to need some dipping solution. Now you can use dipping solution or you can use rejuvenator spirit, which is exactly the same thing. This has just got a very high alcohol content, which helps to dry the cake a lot quicker. We're going to need some lustre dust. So we're going to be using gold lustre. Now I mix gold sparkle by Sugar Flare and Faker Hill, which is signature gold, which is a slightly darker gold. So I add a tiny bit of that, which I will show you the quantities when we come to that part of the tutorial. You're just going to need some paint brushes. So I've got one to put the piping gel on with and one to actually paint the gold lustre onto the sequins. We're going to need some cocktail sticks. This is going to be for the flowers. So some cocktail sticks. To colour the roses, we're going to be using peach by Pro Gel and a tiny bit of dark brown. For the large rose on top of the cake, you're going to need a styrofoam ball. This is 35 millimeters. You can get them from eBay. And most places on eBay sell them in packs of 20. You can get large quantities as well. You're going to need a 20 gauge wire. This is just in white. The color doesn't really make too much of a difference, whatever you can get hold of really. You're going to need a rolling pin and a board to roll out on. So it should be like a non-stick board. For the large rose on top, you're going to need some flour paste. So I use Squires. Squires is a really good brand. I've also used the sugar paste flour paste, which is quite good as well. This one's a little bit more expensive, but it's great to work with. For the roses, the small roses that going around the cake, you just need some normal sugar paste fondant. It doesn't need to be flour paste. You can use flour paste, but you don't really need to. You can just use standard sugar paste for that. And lastly, you just need, I've got here a piping bag, which is going to help us make the small roses around the cake. So it's just a piping bag, which I've just cut one end. And I will show you what we're going to be doing with that. So that's everything you're going to need for this tutorial. Let's get started. Also for the large rose, you're going to need a apple tray. This is just an apple tray from the supermarket. It's a cardboard apple tray, just so we can dry the petals in. And the cutters that I'm going to be using for the large rose, so I have a large, a medium and a small. And just to give you an idea of measurements, the large one measures 8 centimeters long by 6.5 centimeters wide. The medium one measures 7 centimeters long and 5.5 centimeters wide. And then the smallest one measures 6.5 centimeters by 5 centimeters wide. So they're the 3 cutters that I will be using for the large rose. So I have my iced cake. So I have just iced a 6-inch dummy. And we're now gonna apply the sequins. So I've got approximately 120 grams of these white sequins here. I'm not sure we're gonna use all of these. But just to give you a rough idea. So the first thing we're going to do is you need to get your piping gel and you need to get a brush, and we're going to brush on the piping gel onto the cake, and you want to make sure that you apply it enough just to make sure that the actual sequins stick. So we're not gonna cover the top. We're literally just gonna start from the sides and just brush around and just make sure that you've got a good coat of piping gel. I've just put a board underneath my turntable as well, just to catch any sequins that might fall, and just so my turntable doesn't get too messy. And if you haven't got enough piping gel on, then your sequins just aren't gonna stick. Just make sure you go right to the bottom as well. Okay, and once you've got enough on, just go around your cake and just double check. We're going to start adding the sequins. So all you want to do is, this can get a bit messy, so you want to make sure you've got like a damp cloth to hand or some wipes just to wipe your hands if you need to. Grab some sequins in your hands, and just starting from the bottom, you're going to work your way up. So start from the bottom, and as you can see, they go everywhere. And what you can do is, because this is a dummy, it's got no weight to it, I'm just going to hold the top there. And don't worry about covering every single space, because sometimes I think it looks nice when there's a few gaps anyway. So there, for example, now I haven't put enough piping gel, so I'm just going to add a little bit of piping gel on there. And if you find it easier, rather than starting from the bottom, you can start at the top and work your way downwards. And just go around, just make sure you've got, you've covered any big gaps, because obviously you don't want really big gaps. And just really press down just to make sure that they're sticking and they're not just going to fall off. Press down. I'm just going to pop these ones back into the bowl. And again, if you feel that you need a little bit more piping gel on some areas, you can just brush on some piping gel. And then go ahead and stick on your sequins. And we don't want any at the top, so because we didn't put any piping gel at the top anyway, the ones that have just gone to the top, you can just push those downwards. And just making sure that you've got a nice amount at the bottom as well. You don't want really big gaps. Some gaps is fine, you can have them a little bit spaced out, but you don't want like a massive gap there, for example, and kind of all over the cake, because that will just, it won't look right. Okay, and once you're happy with that, just kind of press them in, making sure that they're nice and stuck. Now we're going to let this dry for at least half an hour, because it will take, otherwise if you try and paint over this, they'll just all keep falling off. So we're going to leave this about half an hour to an hour, And in that time, we're going to make our roses and our flowers, which will give us enough time for us to then come back and paint the lustre onto the sequins. So we're now going to make these small roses, which are going to surround the cake. And for this, you are going to need some sugar paste. So this is just white sugar paste or fondant, which is the same thing. So this isn't the flour paste, which we're going to use for the larger rose. This is just normal sugar paste that we're going to be using. We're going to colour this in peach, which this one is Pro Gel Peach. And we're going to add a tiny amount of dark brown, and what that's going to do is it's just going to take away the brightness of the peach, and it's just going to make it a little bit more vintage, which just looks a little bit nicer, I think, to complement the gold. So what we're going to do first, we are going to colour the sugar paste, and I'm going to show you how we do that. So you don't want to add too much to this because we don't want to make it really bright. And less is more at this stage, because you can always add some more colouring after, but you can't take it away. So we're just going to start off. Now you can wear gloves at this stage because we're not using a huge amount of colour. I'm just going to literally put the colour in the centre, fold that over, just so it's not going to go all over my hands. And what you want to do is you want to just start stretching and just keep stretching the sugar paste. And you will see that the colour starts to come through. You just want to keep stretching. A lot of people just roll the ball in their hand. That doesn't actually incorporate the colour. You actually need to stretch it in, and you're almost kneading in the colour. If you do feel like your sugar paste is quite sticky, you can use something like Petal Base or Trex, which is just a vegetable shortening, and that will basically it just gets rid of the stickiness, and it just makes it a little bit more pliable and easier to work with. So I'm going to go slightly darker than that, so I'm going to add in a little bit more colouring to this, just because we want it to be a little bit more peach. So again, I'm only going to add in a tiny amount. And again, that's in the centre. I'm just going to fold that over and then just start that stretching again to mix in the colour. And you want to get it to a stage where you can't see any more streaks. That's still quite streaky. So we're just going to keep kneading that in. Now that's the perfect depth of the peach that I want. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add in literally a dot of the brown. So I'm not going to add in too much. So I will just show you how much I'm going to kind of add in. Literally that's it. It's just like a line of brown. Now I'm only colouring a little bit of sugar paste because I'm going to show you about 3 of these roses. I've actually made all of the ones that I need to go around the cake, because I don't want you to sit there and watch me make all of them, which would get a little bit tedious. So because I'm actually only colouring up a little bit of sugar paste, obviously you will need to use more colour when you're colouring in your sugar paste enough for all the roses to go around your 6-inch cake or your 8-inch cake. So there's no streaks in there now, so we're now gonna continue to make the roses. Now the easiest way to make these is if you're going to be making quite a few at one time. The sugar paste dries out very quickly. So what we want to do is we want to actually roll out some round circles, some round balls. And what you want is you want the approximate slightly bigger. So if you know your ball tool, the bigger side, you want to make it slightly bigger than the ball tool. So just to give you a kind of indication of how big you actually want each of the balls. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll out a few of these, and just so they don't dry out, I'm going to place it into a plastic bag, and that will just save them from drying out. So what I would do is, if I was going to be making all of them, I would roll out the round balls all together and just place them into the bag. So I'm going to show you 3. I'll make 3 roses just to show you. So each rose, you need 4 balls for each rose. Okay, so these aren't going to dry out now because I've got them in my plastic bag. Now what we're going to need for these roses is, I'm just using a piping bag. This is just a 12-inch piping bag, and I've cut open one side just so it's easy for me to place the round balls in. You can actually use sleeves that you use for papers that you put in a filing into a file, those kind of plastic sheets, or you can use something like this, but you just want to make sure that it's got no creases in, because then the creases will actually indent onto the fondant balls. So just make sure that whatever you're using, it's not creased, it hasn't got any lines in or anything. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to take 4 of the balls, and what I'm going to do is, I'm going to place, I'm going to do 2 first. Now, so we're going to keep 3 as round balls. Now the 4th one, we're going to just make it into a kind of like a sausage shape, just like that. So you're just making it a bit longer there. And then what you want to do is, with each of the balls, you want to press down. So press down fairly lightly. You're only going to be thinning the top. So we're going to leave the bottom of it quite thick. Now what you want to do is just press the top. So you're thinning out. You don't want to press too hard, because then you could end up tearing the fondant, or it could become very, very thin. These flowers, the mini ones, they're not really designed to be very, very delicate looking, realistic flowers. These are lovely for novelty cakes and things like that. So as you can see now, that's really thin at the top, but we've still got a thicker base at the bottom. So all I've done is, I've literally just smoothed over the top there, and we're going to do that for 3 of the balls. So again, I'm just pressing the top, and you get a really, really nice thin and thicker bottom there. And that's the 3rd one. Now with this one here, we want to do the same thing. We want to thin just one side and leave the bottom thicker. So if you place it into your plastic, And what you want to do is you want to kind of push down in the middle very, very gently, and then just start feathering upwards just on the top, and then just thin the top over. And then again, as you can see, you've got a nice thin top there and the bottom bit is thicker. Now the reason we keep the bottom bit thicker is it just prevents you from rolling the center, which is going to be the bud, really, really thin. So what we want to now do is we want to start rolling this into, so we're making the center of the rose. So we just want to roll there like that, and then you end up having, so you want to roll it fairly tightly, and you end up having the center of the rose there. And to attach them, so I'm going to get my first petal. Now I don't tend to use water or sugar glue on these because they tend to stick. So where that join is, where that initial join is, we're going to place the first one just over that join, making sure that it's a tiny bit higher than the actual bud, so it's a fraction higher. We're going to just attach, so if you're looking at it from the back, from this side, which is the right side, you're going to stick that bit down and you're going to leave this side open, so it kind of looks like that. You're then going to get the second petal and you're going to place that, so just where that one, just so you're touching the bud, and then you're going to pull that this side over and just push that down. And again, then we're going to get the third one and we're going to just push that down, so you end up with a rose. And what we want to do is we want to kind of feather these bits out just to give it some sort of movement, and just so it looks like a nice rose. And what you can do is, if you feel that some of the bits are a little bit stuck, you could just use like a paintbrush and just open them out a little bit more. And then you want to squeeze slightly from the bottom. And now what we want to do is, that's quite long at the body, we want to actually cut some of that off. And just so you've got an idea, the rough height that you want the rose is gonna be, it's gonna be about 2 centimeters. So we're gonna just cut off the excess there, and you have a really nice rose. And we're gonna do, I'm gonna show you the other two like that as well. So I'm going to get another 4 of the balls. And so we're going to just start again thinning out the top of each one. The great thing about these roses is that they don't take any time at all. You don't need to use a ball tool to kind of thin them out. There's no drying time for the petals because they're so small and intricate. They're very effective as well, and they don't take any time, and they look great on novelty cakes or celebration cakes. So again, we're going to roll that one out longer. We're going to do the same thing. We're just going to thin out the top. And then we're going to do that roll. Just make sure it's tight enough so you get that nice kind of center. And again, where that join is, just going to place the first petal there, so it's a little bit higher than the bud. Leave that one open. Place the second one in. And when you place the second one in, you're just really pulling the first one over and across and down, just so it sticks. Open the last petal that you just put on. Pull that down. Okay, and again, we're just going to cut the bottom. We're just going to cut the bottom there just so it's about 2 centimeters. And I'm going to show you the last one. So that's the center, the bud. Just start thinning out the tops again. And I'm just going to roll the center of the bud. Touch the first one over the join, making sure it's sitting slightly higher than the bud. And then just slightly feather those out a little bit. And then just trim off your excess. And there you have your rose. So I have actually pre-made all my roses, which are going to go onto the cake, which are going to go around the bottom of the cake. So I made these all earlier. So what we're going to do now is I will show you how to make the large open rose, which is going to sit on top of the cake. So we're now going to make our large rose, which is going to be sitting on top of the cake. So I've got my flower paste here, and what we're going to do is we're going to colour this in the same Pro Gel Peach, and we're just going to add a touch of dark brown again, just to get that nice kind of toned down peach colour. So I'm going to show you how to knead the colour into the flower paste as well. So just give it a little stretch and just knead it in initially. So I want the same colour as the small roses that we made. So again, at this stage, less is more. You can add more in afterwards. And I'm just gonna, at the same time, I'm just going to add in my tiny streak of brown. So really it's just like a line of brown. Okay, and again, the same way that we coloured the small roses, I'm just going to fold that in, and I'm just going to stretch that into the paste. And you'll see that the colour will start coming through. And you know when it's all kind of incorporated, when there's no streaks showing through when you're stretching. So I need a little bit more peach in there. I've put the same amount that I put initially. And again, if you find this is getting a little bit sticky, you can use something like Trex or Petal Base. Just put a little bit into the paste and just carry on kneading, and you'll find that there'll be no stickiness there. Mine isn't too bad today. Okay, so we've got our nice colour. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to roll out the whole of the sugar paste, the flour paste, because I only want to cut out 4 petals to start with. So I'm going to take some of the paste, and the rest of it I'm going to pop back into a clear plastic bag, otherwise this will dry out. It dries out very, very quickly. Okay, and then what I want to do is I want to start rolling this out quite thin. So you need like your some form of non-stick mat and your rolling pin, and you're just going to start rolling. And just keep lifting it off the board from time to time. And you want to put a fair amount of pressure because we do want this to be quite thin. And don't worry about it tearing because it's quite durable, this flour paste. So it's it does take a lot for it to kind of rip and tear. So as you can see, I am going fairly thin with this. That's quite thin now, as you can kind of see in my hands. And when we kind of look, that's the kind of thickness you want it. So it is fairly thin. And when we're going to cut these petals around, try and cut from around the outside because that's where your petal paste will be the thinnest. Just going to roll it out slightly thinner there. Okay. And before you cut, just lift once more just to make sure it's not sticking onto the board. So I'm going to get the smallest of the cutters, and we want to cut out 4 of these. So you want to press down and just give it a little move on the board and lift, and you should get a nice clean edge. And that's kind of how thin we've got the petal. So we're going to do that 4 times. Okay, we're going to pop the rest of this back now into the bag, otherwise it will dry out. So now what we're going to do with these is we're going to thin them out even more, and what we're going to use for that is just our rolling pin. So for the initial ones, we're just going to, taking your rolling pin, not worrying about the point, so the point is going to stay slightly thicker, but just where you've got this bit here, we're just going to start putting pressure on the edges, and we just want to roll out. You don't want to change the shape too much, and you don't want to make them too much bigger than what they are, just very, very slightly. But the main aim here is you're thinning out the petals. And you want to make them a tad bigger than what they were before. And just make sure they are paper thin. So now, where you can see they are super thin now, but this bit I haven't thinned out the point, it's just the top. And we want to do that to all of the petals. Press quite firmly, because that's what's going to really give you the thin. As you can see, super thin there. And don't worry if they're not all the same shape and size, it really does not make a difference. So don't worry about that. Now the last one, we are going to actually roll this out a lot longer. So you want this fairly long in the body of the petal. So what you want to do is you want to concentrate on making this one longer than the other three. And you can go the other way as well, just to make it a little bit wider. Okay, now really you want these to dry for at least 5 minutes. And whilst that's drying, we are going to put the wire into the ball. So I'm going to show you how to do that, and that will give this enough time to kind of not be so flimsy and dry up a little bit, which will make it a lot easier to stick onto the actual ball. So what you want to do, you want to get your wire. Now this wire was double the length. I've just cut it in half with some wire cutters. In the center of your ball, you just want to pierce through. Now, if you find it difficult piercing through, just get a little cocktail stick, and you can pierce it with a cocktail stick first, just to make that hole. And then you can insert your wire. And just make sure that the ball is in the center of the wire, or as central as possible. And then what you want to do is you want to hold the ball in your hand and bring these down, so it looks like that. And then you want to start twisting from the bottom, so quite a tight twist, and just twist. So you end up with like a stalk. And don't worry if it doesn't meet right at the bottom, that's fine. This is quite a strong wire, so sometimes that doesn't happen. But that's going to be the base for our rose. You can actually make these with flour paste, but the thing with these is, because this is quite a big rose, there's always a chance that this is going to fall through, and you don't really want any accidents happening when you're making a cake. So I tend to use these for like much smaller roses, but this is going to be quite a large open rose, so I tend to use a styrofoam, which is a lot more secure and sturdy. Okay, now that's had about a minute to dry. So what we want to do is you want to turn them over. The reason we turn them over is the side that you've been rolling is the stickier side anyway. So we might as well go ahead and put the glue or the water on that side. Okay, so what you want to do now is, I'm just using some plain water in a pot, but you can use sugar glue. Sugar glue is probably a little bit better. If you're going to use water, don't use so much, because you don't want it to go really, really sticky. So, but what you want to do is, with your paintbrush, you just want to start putting water onto the whole of the petal. Maybe you don't need to go right to the top. You can leave some of it at the top there, but as long as you've got the sides. And on the other ones. And just try and get that point at the bottom as well. Okay, now we're going to start off with the longest one that we've rolled out. So what we want to do here is you want to pick up your petal and you want to place it in the palm of your hand, and you want to face it so it's lying across your hand with the point either at the left or the right. What you want to do is get your ball and place it in the center. Now you have to make sure that it's sitting above, so you've got some petal at the top. Now what you want to do is you want to pull over. First of all, pull the top and just secure down the top. Okay, so you've got like enough coming out the top there. And then you want to just secure this side down. Okay, and then you've got that kind of little, it's going to be the middle of the rose. Now with this side, you just want to overlap that tiny little bit at the top there. And don't worry if you get any tears or anything, because this is all going to be covered. The most important thing is to achieve that so it's overlapping. That is the most important thing there. So once you've managed to get that, that's going to be the center of the rose. You just want to place down the bottom. Now you probably need some more glue at the bottom or some more water there, so you can just add some water. And even if it looks really untidy at this stage, don't worry. This is all going to get covered. I've got some excess there, so I'm just going to get my scissors and I'm just going to cut that off because I don't need so much there. You just make sure it's really stuck down. That's the most important thing. Okay. So as you can see, I've got some tears there, but that's all going to get covered anyway. The most important thing was to get that center, which we've now got. So now I'm going to get one of my other petals, and where that's not covered, I'm going to place that one on the front, making sure that it's a tiny bit higher than the point, just a fraction higher. When I'm looking at it from the back, this is my right side. I'm going to just fold down my right side. Just make sure it's nice and stuck on, and if you need some more water, add in some more water there, and just make sure that's nicely stuck down. Okay, and we're just going to leave that left side open because the next petal is going to sit in on the left side. Again, just making sure it's a fraction higher. You want to really make sure that you're sticking down that right side now of that second petal. Okay, and you want to leave the other side open because the other petal is going to fall back in. Now this is the first petal that we put on. What you want to do is you want to stretch it slightly, push it down and stick. And just make sure it's nice and stuck down, quite close to the actual petal, to the actual center, sorry. Now, the next petal is going to go inside that second one. And just make sure it's kind of really as close to the center as possible, because we want this bit to be quite closed. So again, just really making sure that you're securing down this side. Again, with this side, we're just going to pull across gently, pull down and stick. And then this last one, pull across, down and stick. Now we've got a lot of paste there at the bottom, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start to bring that up, and I'm just going to cut off just any unnecessary paste, because this is going to make it really bulky and we don't need this paste at the bottom there. Okay, and just stick down, making sure that it's all nice and stuck. Just going to stick these down again on the sides. There's a lot going on, so you're trying to sort the bottom out, making sure that these are still nice and stuck on as well. Any unused paste, just you can pull that off, that's fine. And I promise you, you won't even see this bit once all the rest of the petals go on. So it's really important, you know, to get the base of it, the initial petals right and stuck down. Because if these ones aren't stuck down, then everything else will just fall off. Okay, and that's the initial center. And now we're going to work on our second layer. So we're going on to our second layer now, and for this we're just going to roll out some more paste, and we're going to be using the smallest of the cutters again, and we're just going to be rolling out 3 of those petals again. So again, you want this thin as you can. Okay, and that's nice and thin now. So again, just try and cut around the edges, because that's where typically where the thinnest of the paste tends to be. So I'm going to cut 3 out. If you do have any like frayed kind of edges, just like with your finger, just move them back inwards, just smooth them in. What you can do is when it's still in the cutter, you can just run your finger around the cutter, and that will eliminate any kind of frayed edges that you get. Okay, so that's our 3 petals. Now again, exactly the same way, we're just going to thin these out with our rolling pin, but this time we're not going to make one longer in the body, we're just going to literally thin out the edges. I make them a little bit longer. They don't need to be hugely longer, but the main thing is just thinning out those edges so they're nice and thin. And again, as you can see, they are super thin. Just makes your flower look a lot more nice, delicate. Again, you really want to give these a minute or so to kind of firm up slightly. This flower paste does start drying quite quickly, and it just makes it easier to stick the petals on. So we've got our 3 petals there. Now, whilst we're waiting for this to just slightly firm up, as I was saying earlier, the center is really important. If you feel like you can't see the kind of center, you can use your cocktail stick and you can just kind of move it into the center or open up the hole in the middle a little bit more if it's too enclosed. So you can kind of just move it along if you need to with like a cocktail stick. So this is already started to firm up now, and we only did this literally 5 minutes ago. So I'm just going to pop that back into my, just have a styrofoam piece handy as well, just so you can put your flower into whilst you're working on the rest of the petals. So what we're going to now do is, again, we're going to turn these over because that's the stickier side from where we've been rolling. And what we want to do here is we just want to, again, just put some glue over the petals, not around the top and not necessarily around the full edge, just leaving a tiny space, but just around the bottom and most of the petal. Okay, now what you want to do is where you've got one of those joins, the first petal is going to go directly over that join and is going to sit a tiny fraction higher than the other petals. Not overly high, but just a fraction higher. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to place that on top of the join, and really important, so when I'm looking at it from this side, this is my right side, that's your left there, you're just going to stick down that side, leaving one side open. Make sure you're not pressing too much because the center isn't fully dried yet and you don't want to start pushing that in, otherwise it will become a very small rose. And what you want to do is just attach it to the bottom, open that one up, and we're going to put in our next petal. So again, we're just going to go, I'm not going to start totally inwards this time, I'm just going to leave a slight gap because we keep an eye on your spacing as well, because you need room for the other one to fit nicely. You're going to smooth down, I'm going to smooth down this side here. Now again, we're going to do that whole pulling across. This is the first petal. Pull it across, but not so much this time, just very slightly pull down and stick down. So you don't want it to be totally enclosed, this one. Now that's that petal. We're going to open this one. We're going to put the last petal in. I'm just going to smooth down that side. Okay, we're going to pull that across and down, and then the last one, pull it across and just stick down there. Okay, and if you need to kind of maneuver them a little bit and move them, you can do, just open them up again and stick them down. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, at the bottom there, I'm just going to make sure I've got enough glue, and I'm just going to stick these bits down. Again, if you've got lots and lots of paste at the bottom here, you can cut it off, but I'm just going to stick this bit down now because it's not so excessive. And just make sure they're nicely, firmly stuck down. And if you need some more glue on the sides of the petals, you can just put some more glue just to stick those down as well. Now with these ones, what we want to do is we don't want them to be so open, so I'm just going to gently just feather them out very, very slightly, not too much, because then that will make the next set a bit more difficult to stick on. And there. Okay. And that's the second row that's gone on. So now really you want this to dry for at least half an hour before we go ahead and put the next layer on. So leave it for at least half an hour, just so this firms up a little bit, and then we will move on to the next layer. So that's been drying now for about half an hour, and we're going to go on to the next layer of petals. Now for this one, we're going to use our medium-sized cutter, so the next cutter up, and we want to roll out and cut out 5 of these petals. When the the flour paste comes out of the packet, just knead it just so it's a bit more pliable. And we want to start rolling this out. Now with these ones, you don't need to go as thin, because we are gonna thin these out with the ball tool. You still want to go fairly thin, but they don't need to be as paper thin. So that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and cut 5 of these out. That side feels a little bit thick to me, so I'm just going to go ahead and roll this out slightly. Okay, and then the last one. Now with these, we're not going to actually use our rolling pin to thin these out. We're going to actually use our ball tool. So you've got 2 sides of the ball tool, thinner side and the bigger side. We're going to use the bigger side. You want to get your foam pad, and we're going to just place the first one onto there. So the way you want to do this is, you don't want to have the ball tool fully on the pad. You want it half on the pad and half of it on the actual petal. And you want to just go in one motion quite firmly around, and then you can go a second time. So twice should be enough. And you get kind of like a bit of a frilly petal. We don't want it too frilly at this stage, so you can just smooth that out a little bit, and then just a little bit in the center there. Okay, so we're going to do that with all 5. So half of it on the petal pad and half of it on the actual, and don't be scared to press down quite firmly, because that's what's going to give you that thinned out edge. I'll just show you what happens if you don't press firmly enough. You'll just get that. And some people are really afraid to push down quite firmly, but it's quite difficult for this to tear because it is quite strong paste. And you want to make sure you've got that nice thin petal, just so they look a little bit more realistic. Again. So really just once around that way should be absolutely fine. You don't want to keep going over it because then that will just make it really, really ruffly, which you don't really want. If you haven't got a ball tool as well, you can actually use your rolling pin. So I'll just show you. You can actually use that, it works brilliantly. So for the next layer, I'll actually use that and show you that one. So if you haven't got one of these, you don't need to especially go out and buy one. You can just use your rolling pin. Okay, now once you've thinned these out, you want to get your cocktail stick, and we're going to just create some points on these so they look a little bit more roughly. So what you want to do is with your cocktail stick, place it diagonally, and you just want to roll that in. So if you can see, I'm just rolling that in, and then I'm letting go of the cocktail stick, and I'm ending up with that. And then you want to come back from the same side, and you don't want to leave too much of a gap here, so you want to just make sure that they're kind of meeting, and you end up with that. We're going to do that for all 5. So start in there. You're just using your cocktail stick to roll it around. I'll just show you one here so you can see clearly. So cocktail stick is there. I'm gonna roll, release. And when you release a cocktail stick, it will stay. You want to make sure that there isn't really a gap there. I'll show you the wrong way to do it. So what you don't want is that, because then that will just look really odd once you put them onto the cake. So you want to make sure that they're actually meeting, almost meeting. Okay. And then what you want to do is you just want to turn them over. And we're going to place them into our apple tray. And we want to actually put them into the tray face downwards. And when you put them into the tray, just make sure that you they're not overly ruffly, because then that will just make them super hard to stick down. So just kind of flatten that out a little bit, making sure that the curve is nice and flat against the actual cardboard tray. Now, depending on weather conditions, you really want to leave this for sort of 10 to 15 minutes, just so they firm up nicely, and then they will be a lot easier to put onto the actual flower. So we will come back in 10 to 15 minutes and I will show you how to attach these. So these have been drying now for about 10 minutes. So if we pick them up, they are holding their shape. They're not just kind of falling flat, but you can still move them, which is great. So what we're gonna now do is we're gonna put these onto the flower. So I'm just going to just keep them on the sides that they're ready are. Now for this one, we're not going to paint the glue or the water all the way onto the petal. We are just going to paint down the right side and the left side. And just make sure you've got enough on so your petals just aren't falling off. So just the right side, just make sure that the point is downwards. It can get a bit confusing because they both look the same now because you've got the points on both sides, but obviously where you've done the ruffles, that's the top and the other one's side's the bottom. So it's quite easy to make that mistake of putting them on the wrong way. And what you can do is once the glue's gone on, you can just give them a minute or so just for the glue to, or the water to kind of sink into the flower paste, which just makes it a little bit more tacky and sticky. Okay, so because we've left this flower now as well, it's starting to dry already, which is great. So again, the first petal is going to go on top of this join. Now we're not going to go directly higher this time. We're just going to sit this slightly, very slightly lower. So it's not massively low, but we just want to start to press down. So when I'm looking at it, it's my right from the back. Just want to start to press that down. Just make sure it's securely stuck on. If you need some more water or glue, then just put some more in and just stick it down from the bottom as well. This is a little bit trickier, this part. So we want to open that one up. Now we're going to put in our next petal. This is probably the trickiest layer, to be honest. We want to go in with the next petal. So we're going to just sit that in. And again, it's got to be slightly lower. Stick down that side there, just make sure it's nicely stuck on. Now with this one, we're not going to pull it across totally, we're just going to very gently stick that down from the bottom there. And again, you need more water and glue, you can just add on at each stage. So we're going to keep that one open, we're just going to add in our next petal. Inside that one, stick down. Okay, and then pull this one across and just stick it down. And from the bottom as well, make sure they're stuck on the bottom. If you need to turn it around just to stick down, then you can do that. Okay. Keep an eye on your spacing as well, because you want to make sure that your petals are going around nicely. Inside there, and we're just going to stick down that side and then pull across that one. And then the last one now is just going to, so you're going to open up the first one and the last one that you've put in, and that's just going to sit in there. Okay, and then you're just going to push that down and pull that one over. And you just want to turn it around now, because chances are that the petals will fall off. And just make sure that's all nicely stuck down together. Now at this stage, You can either hang it upside down if you feel like your petals are just gonna fall off. But if they feel secure enough, you can just put them back into styrofoam. I like to just hang that upside down, so you can just hang it onto like anywhere, like a kitchen cupboard or the oven door or something, just to make sure that, you know, they don't fall off. But if they feel fairly secure, then you can just sit it upright. I don't risk it. I just like to hang it this way, just so I know that they're not going to fall off. So really you need this one to dry now for at least 1 hour before you add on the last layer of the petals. Okay, so we're now going to move on to the last layer of our rose. Now this has been drying for about an hour, so it started to dry already. So we're going to start cutting out. We're using the largest cutter now. We're going to cut out 7 of these petals. Need that a little bit because it's been sitting in the plastic bag. It's been sitting in the bag and it hasn't dried out at all, which is brilliant. So again, we're going to roll this out fairly thin. We want to get 7 of these large petals. Just make sure you're lifting every so often, just so it's not going to get totally stuck onto the board. Make sure you're rolling it out big enough. Okay, so I'm going to start cutting 7 of these. This side feels a little bit thicker still, so I'm just going to roll it out a bit more. Center is always tends to be a lot thicker, so I just try and roll that out as thin as I can. Okay, I'm just going to roll this out because I need another 2 petals. It wasn't quite big enough. that's the last one that we're going to roll out. Okay, so we've got our petals, and now what we're going to do is we're going to just start to thin these out with the ball tool. No, I'm actually not going to use a ball tool. I'm going to use this to show you. So if you don't have a ball tool, you can easily use your rolling pin the same way, half onto the actual pad and half on the petal. Just go around a couple of times and you get a lovely thin petal. Again, don't be too afraid to put down pressure, because you do want that nice thin petal. Sometimes the paste can feel a little bit sticky and your tool will catch and it'll start to tear it. If that happens, then it means that it just needs to be left to dry for a minute or so until it dries out, and then they're easier to thin out. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing. So with the cocktail stick, we're just going to turn them inwards and make those points. Just making sure that they're meeting at the end, so you've got that point there. Just not forgetting to don't leave too much space between these points again, because your cake, the petals, they won't look right. Okay, and the last one. Okay, now we're going to put these into our apple tray to dry, but instead of using the inside bit, we're just going to turn that over because we don't want so much of a curve this time. So what you want to do is you're just going to place them with the curled in bits on the top. Now really you want these to dry for at least 15 minutes, just until they're a little bit firmer and easier to stick onto the flower. So I'm going to leave those now for 15 minutes and then we're going to attach the last layer to the flower. Okay, so the petals have been drying now for at least 15 minutes. So they're now holding their shape. You can still move them, which is great. So what we're going to do is going to get my blue pad, I'm going to get my flower and I'm just going to place it downwards like this. You don't want to push down too much, just in case it's still not fully dried. And what you want to do is you want to just turn the petals over, because we're going to be painting the glue or the water on this side. So you want to make sure you're putting enough glue on the right and the left, just on each side. Again, be careful because both sides are pointed now. The top is obviously going to be where we've curled them in. Okay, so we're going to bring our flower into the center. So what we want to do here is, we're just going to look at the join. Now these petals are going to go, they're not going to be going totally lower than the actual center. You want them slightly a tad higher. So when you're kind of looking at it, if you look at it, just a fraction lower, just a fraction lower than the actual center is. We're just going to pop that down, and I'm just going to put down both sides. Don't stick down that side completely, because when it comes to the end petal, we're going to be placing that into that bit there. So put down, so when you're looking at it from this side, this is your left side. Just going to put down the left side, make sure that you're fully sticking it at the top there. Okay, then you're going to get your next petal. This time we're not placing it inside, we're just going to overlap. And we're going to put them both down, so the right and the left side. And you're going to keep going around. Now just keep an eye on your spacing as well, because we've got 7 petals to go around. You don't want to end up being too short or overlapping again. So just keep an eye on the spacing as well. So now we've got 3 petals on, and I've got another 4 to go, which is absolutely fine. So I'm kind of slightly more than halfway. Making sure always that you're sticking down the center. Don't press in too much, because what will happen is you don't want to risk pressing the rose and then you'll end up getting a really small rose. So just bear in mind that could still not be fully dried. Okay, sticking that down. And sometimes you feel like you might need some more glue, so I'm just going to put some more glue there because it wasn't sticking down fully. And stick down that side again. Just making sure that that first one, you're able to keep that open as well. Okay, stick that down. And then the last one, I'm just going to add a bit more glue or water, and you're just going to place that inside that first one and inside that one there. So that one was just sitting inside. Now just really make sure that the top is kind of secure. Now I'm going to keep it this way because I know if I turn it around the petals will just fall off. Now this really needs to dry at least 4 to 6 hours. If you can leave it overnight then that's even better. What I've got is I've just got some rolled up kitchen roll, and what we're going to do is we're just going to place some kitchen roll just in between, because we don't want it to dry too close. We want it to be quite an open rose. So just and that will just help it stay open and dry nicely. And just, you can make sure that they're different kind of sizes, because it looks quite nice when some of them are slightly more open than the other side. Okay, so we're going to leave that now, just sitting on the blue pad. We're going to leave that. I'm going to leave it at least 4 to 6 hours. Best thing to do is, if you've got time, is just leave it overnight, and that will just make sure that it's fully dried nicely. And we will come back, and we're then going to attach all the flowers to your finished cake. So we're now moving on to painting the sequins in gold, and for this we are going to be using some gold sparkle by Sugar Flare and a touch of signature gold by Faker Hill, because I feel like this just slightly darkens it, the gold, a little bit, and it looks quite nice. And we need some dipping solution or rejuvenator spirit, doesn't matter, it's the same thing. So what we're going to start off by doing is, I'm just going to pop some of the gold sparkle into the bowl, and then I'm just going to add a very, very tiny amount. I'm not going to add too much. It's just probably quarter of the amount of gold sparkle that I added. There's no real exact measurement to this. It's really just kind of eyeballing it and just seeing the kind of colour. So we can always add more or less once the rejuvenated spirit's gone in. So we want to make this, we don't want to make this too thin. We want it to be a nice kind of paste with good coverage. So I'm just going to add some of that in, and I'm just going to kind of swirl it around. Just make sure that's all mixed in nicely, and you've got quite a nice gold there. So what I'm going to do now with my brush, I'm just using like a flat kind of brush. You know, a good quality brush is better, because then you don't risk the hairs coming off onto the cake. So try and invest in a good quality brush for this. And what we want to do is, we're not going to do sweeping motions for this. We're just going to be patting on. So I'm just going to get some of that, and I'm just going to start patting down. Make sure you've got enough on your brush. Now, because we've let this set, you want this ideally to set at least an hour. If you can leave it overnight, brilliant, leave it overnight. Otherwise, what will happen is, I mean, some of the sequins might still come off a little bit, but it's not going to be nowhere near as much as what they would have done if we'd just started painting straight away. You just want to get a nice coverage. This rejuvenator spirit as well, it evaporates extremely, extremely quickly, even from the bowl. So you are going to need to mix in more colour, add some more rejuvenator spirit to it. Just going to add a tiny bit more spirit to that. I don't want to waste any colour. I just want to get as much colour as I can out of this. Just going right to the bottom as well, just making sure you're getting any gaps. You don't want to see any white. Okay, so I need to mix up some more colour now. So I'm going to go ahead. Again, don't make sure it's not too runny, but it shouldn't be too thick either that you can't spread it. It should just be kind of decent consistency. Now this board I'm using as well, it's a matte board. You can get these from Cake Decorating Company or the Cake Craft Company. Now the great thing about this is it's wipeable, whereas if you cover the board with fondant, so this is the board I'm going to actually use for the cake, and I'm just going to wipe this down afterwards because they wipe down really, really well. Don't worry if a couple of the sequins come off. We've got more than enough on there anyway. Now what I've done is as well, is because I wanted to brighten the gold up, I've added in some royal gold. So I haven't added any of the other gold to it. So in my bowl, I've just put some royal gold by Faker Hill, and I've just added in the Rejuvenated Spirit, and this just brightens up the gold. So the undertone of it is going to be quite antique-y, and then it just gives it a really lovely bright gold on the cake as well. So you're not getting that horrible yellowy kind of gold that you get. This is a really pretty gold colour. It's just really effective as well. So the first layer is going to be the signature gold, tiny bit of signature gold with gold sparkle, and then we've just gone over it with some Faker Hill Royal Gold, which just makes the whole cake pop. There are golds that you can use which are non-toxic, but they're not edible. And if you're doing dummy cakes, one that I will highly, highly recommend, and it's one I use all the time for dummy cakes, is the Claire Bowman's gold. It is a beautiful gold. It's got amazing coverage. Obviously with that though, it's not edible, so really you should only be using that on decorations that can be removed, and also dummy cakes as well, which is fine. So I'm just going to go ahead and add some more royal gold to this. Also, when you're pricing this cake as well, make sure you price it well, because you're using a lot of gold here. These pots are fairly expensive. I think one of each pot is like $6.95. So I think we've probably at least gone through a couple of these pots. So it's a fairly expensive cake to make, and especially the labour that's gone into there with all the handmade flowers, etc. as well. So yeah, just make sure you're charging enough. So now I'm just going around the cake now, just making sure that I've covered any kind of white gaps. Just make sure it's just dab in the gold where you can see any white bits. And whilst I'm leaving that to dry, and before I go over it again, I'm just going to paint the top. So just going around the top. Just use your turntable as well. and just get rid of any kind of streaks. You don't want to see any streaks. Now I'm just going over any bits which are white and just making sure. Just requires a little bit of patience as well. If we were painting this without the sequins on, it would have been far easier. But it's because of all the sequins, you're going to just get some tiny gaps of where the white is. I'm just going to go around the top again, just make sure that's nice coverage there. And this Rejuvenate Spirit really does not take any time at all to dry, and that's the great thing about this. It dries within minutes, which is brilliant. Okay, so I'm just going to clean up the board now, and you can just use like a kitchen towel, damp kitchen towel, just to wipe around. And I will come back and then show you the next step. So our flowers now dried overnight, and it's time for us to put the flowers around the cake and attach the flower to the top. I've put a hole in the top of my cake, which is where the flower's going to sit, because it's a dummy cake. It's far easier to put a sugar flower into a real cake. You would just need to use something like this, which is a posy pick, because you can't attach wires into a cake unless it's in a posy pick, or you can use something called safety seal, which seals the bottom of the wire, and you can just insert that straight into the cake, which is fantastic as well. So the first thing we're going to do is, I've got all my small roses here, and I'm just going to attach them with some royal icing. So what we want to do is, I'm just going to put some tiny bit of royal icing. You don't want to put too much because it will seep out of the bottom, which will look quite, it doesn't look very nice. And we're just going to place these at an angle. And I'm just going to go all the way around the cake. And I'm just going to leave a very, very slight gap. So I can see it's a little bit awkward doing it this way. So you're just going to go all the way around the cake. It's important as well to have your royal icing a little bit stiff and not too runny when you're putting the royal icing onto the flowers. Otherwise it will just, it won't stick. So you need some kind of thickness to the royal icing. Have all gone around the cake, and now it's time for us to put the larger flower in. I've just put some floral tape around the wire. Again, if it's a real cake, you would use a posy pick. You want to go in at a diagonal, kind of at an angle, and I'm just going to use my scissors to help me with this because it's a dummy cake. It's a little bit tricky. The flower is very fragile as well, so you have to be careful. And there you have your finished cake with your beautiful large rose. So I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you have got any questions, please feel free to send me an email or a message, and you can check out our other tutorials which will be available soon.